I moved into the top floor apartment because the listing promised quiet. No neighbors above, it said, as if that were a guarantee of sleep. The building itself was a narrow brick wedge on a street that never decided whether it was residential or commercial. Two cafes below argued with each other through the day. Their chairs scraped the pavement in tinny chorus, and the single, coughing elevator stitched the floors together with impatient dings. My place was at the very top, a cramped L-shaped layout with a skylight the size of a serving tray, a slanted ceiling, and a view of a roofline stitched with chimney pots like blunt teeth. The first night I lay on the mattress on the floor among sealed boxes and breathed in the smell of old dust. It had weight to it, like flour, like something that could rise. The radiator knocked as if there were a fist stuck inside the pipes, and the building settled with the reluctant groans of cartilage. Outside, the city's noise thinned to a whisper, a distant ribbon of traffic, and the occasional motorbike that sounded like a wasp trapped in a bottle. Just after 2 in the morning, when the quiet had finally pressed itself flat, I heard footsteps overhead. They were not the building's erratic creaks, not expansion or contraction, not the harmless shuffle of pipes. These were footfalls, measured and human, heel, toe, heel, toe. They crossed the bedroom from the corner over my head to the other side, paused, then went back again. A slow pacing. I held my breath, and in that held breath, the sound seemed to grow clearer, close enough that a bit of grit tumbled from a hairline crack in the plaster. It dusted my pillow. The room smelled briefly of cold, like old coins. I sat up, blinking at the sloped ceiling. I reminded myself that old buildings speak in riddles. I reminded myself I was tired and a little drunk on cardboard fumes and the sweet chemical of permanent markers I'd used to label boxes. I listened to the footsteps traverse the ceiling once more and stop above the doorway. Quiet stretched taut, and when it didn't snap, I eventually slept. In the morning, the building manager, a man whose name on the mailbox was 3 letters long and sounded like a cough, shook his head. Attic, he said, chopping the air with his hand. Roof space. Nobody. But I heard. Pigeons, he said with bored certainty, then offered a shrug that dismissed all human experience. Pipes. I knew the difference. That night, I made tea, arranged bowls in the cupboards, lined a row of books along the low ledge by the window until the place looked less like a way station. I told myself that homes are a kind of agreement you make with the air, promise to treat it like yours, and it becomes so. At 2:70 a.m., the footsteps started again. They were patient. They were not trying to frighten me. They didn't need to try. They counted out a path above my bed that felt like the outline of my own thoughts. I lifted my phone, turned on the voice recorder, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes made shadows into shapes. When the steps paused, I knocked the wall with my knuckles, 1, 2, and immediately regretted it. The plaster was cold. The echo made the apartment sound hollow. 1, 2, 3 came from above. I froze, the way you do when a stray cat you're trying not to spook stares at you like a decision. My heart beat so loudly I was sure it registered through the recorder as a war drum. I pressed my palm to the ceiling the next day, an absurd gesture, and imagined it returned a faint coolness in answer. A thread-fine crack intersected the corner over the wardrobe. I stood on a chair, brushed a finger along the crack, and came away with gray dust that smelled like old roofs, tar and sun and bird droppings dried to powder. I found the attic access in the communal hallway, a small square hatch above a narrow cleaning closet, secured with a new padlock that flashed like a tooth in the dim bulb. The hallway smelled of damp, of bleach, and occluded secrets. The padlock had a fresh scratch along one cheek as if someone had fumbled with the key in a hurry. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself to buy thicker earplugs. The third night, I woke because I was not alone with my breathing. The footsteps were faster now, no longer pacing but moving to a rhythm as if they were following a metronome I couldn't hear. They crossed from one wall to the other, quickened, paused on a beat I felt but could not count, then retreated. When I sat up, the steps stopped. When I lay down, a single footfall landed overhead, as if someone above me was standing on one leg in expectation. On the 4th night, something rolled across the ceiling, a little ball bearing or a marble. It ticked along the beam and came to rest with a sound like a muted bell. When I pressed my palm to the plaster, vibrations shivered through my skin. It felt like someone breathing with their mouth closed, right where my hand was. I began to test it. I clapped twice. No answer. I hummed a single note. The footsteps began, slow, slow, then matching the length of my hum. I walked from the kitchen to the living area. The steps paced above in parallel, a field of gravity sharing an axis with mine. I tried to trick it, stopping suddenly, turning, stepping backward, but the thing above learned me like a tongue learns to find a missing tooth. During the day, with the skylight dribbling coins of light into the room and the city's chatter bubbled up loud enough to feel sane, I stopped thinking about it. I worked. I made lists. I bought a stepladder. I also bought a screwdriver with a satisfyingly mean little curve to its tip. I waited for rain. It came on the fifth night, sweeping in ragged waves, a sound like sand poured on glass. The roof drummed. The footsteps began their circuit, and the damp made them sound closer, swollen wood accepting weight. I stood on the stepladder in the hallway closet and tilted my head back. The padlock watched me. So did the tiny cracked ceramic eye of the hallway bulb. I slid the screwdriver into the hinge, braced my shoulder, and twisted. The old screws resisted, and then, with a squeal the color of rust, they turned. When the hatch finally fell open an inch, air like a long-held breath poured out. It was colder than the hallway. I smelled tar and wet feathers and something like a cellar that's never been fully dry. The stepladder was too short, so I dragged my wobbly kitchen table into the hallway and pretended I had a plan. On the table, on the ladder, through the hatch, I arrived in a space that was not a room so much as a memory of one, all ribs and beams. My phone's flashlight licked lines of bright across old timber that had been shaved by hand, its edges scalloped like a worn violin. The roof tiles were a second skin above me, close enough in places to touch. There was a narrow boardwalk of planks laid along the joists, just wide enough for careful feet. Dust softened everything. My light made it shine in miniature stars. Someone had been here. I saw the faint interruption of footprints in the powder, a path darker than the rest. The print wasn't crisp enough to show tread, just ovals where weight had canceled dust. They made a track from the hatch across the attic, then back, over and over, as if someone had practiced a route without deviation until the habit had polished the darkness itself. I turned off my light. The footsteps started. It is a deliciously dangerous thing to be exactly where a fear lives. Sound in the attic doesn't travel. It blooms right around you. The footfalls came from ahead, then to the side, then behind me, all while something like my inner ear whispered that the closest weight was directly above my bedroom, 2 meters to my left. I inched forward until the boardwalk trembled and pressed my fingertips to a beam. Beneath my feet, through the thin wedge of plaster, was the room where I sleep. Above me, an arm's length away, low beams hummed with the building's pulse, rain and wind and the insect buzz of the city that still reached into this sealed lung. "Hello," I said, because the dumb bravery of the living requires it. My breath made clouds that the light exposed, then erased. The footsteps halted, then another sound, not steps but a length of something, from the way it scraped along plaster, being pulled. A rope? A chain? It dragged toward me and stopped. A nail head near my hand trembled and turned slightly as if trying to listen. "Who's there?" I asked, softer, as if a different tone could change the answer. I panned the light. It found nothing but an elision in the dust, a human absence. I was about to retreat when a hairline crack in the plaster below me widened with the tiny noise of opening paper. Through that slit, a triangle of my own bedroom peered back. The edge of the wardrobe, a finger of light from the skylight, the top corner of my mattress. My chest folded itself into something small. On the beam beside the crack, someone had scratched marks, not random, tallies. 555, grouped, and next to them, words gouged with something uneven. Keep pace. Too straight to be graffiti, too careful to be casual. Below that, a set of numbers, then crossed out, then a new set. Times, intervals, the building shifted its weight. Somewhere, water sought a new course. I had the sudden, certain knowledge that there had always been footsteps above the top floor. I just hadn't arrived to hear them. I crawled forward, breath tight, until I could look directly down through the crack. My phone's light made the room below into a bleached diorama. My mattress looked like a boat. My blanket was still thrown back, a human absence the shape of me. The thought that I was both here and not there was dizzying. For a second, I imagined a second me lying below, unmoving, that if I blinked at the wrong time, the two images would fail to line up. Something took my wrist. It was not a hand in the way I understood hands, but it gripped like one, skin cold, the pressure precise, the intent unmistakable. I wrenched back on instinct, the board under my knee creaking so loud it felt obscene. My beam hand slid, fingernails skittering on old wood. I dropped my phone, and its light spun wildly, caging the attic in a spinning, stuttering wheel. In that strobe, I saw movement, not where the grip was, but 2 planks down, my own shadow stepping, heel, toe, heel, toe. The grip tightened and pulled. I felt the telltale give of rotten timber just to my right and saw, with a clarity as thin as glass, the exact path the footsteps had always taken, not out of habit, but because the space between the beams was a mouth waiting for a misstep. Whoever, or whatever, paced up here had learned the safe path by repetition and had written it into the building's memory. I tore free, skin zipping under the pressure, and flung myself belly flat across the 2 nearest beams like a desperate swimmer clinging to the rim of a pool. Splinters nested under my palms. The thing that had gripped me did not follow with a hand, it followed with weight. A step landed on the plank just behind my feet. The beam sang with it, a low, inward ache. I rolled onto my back, my chest a-bellows, and kicked out hard. My heel connected with nothing but air, then with wood, then with something that gave the impression of a knee. The footsteps fell back, 1, 2, measured even in retreat. "Stop," I said, not because I thought it would obey, but because words made me feel like a person in the dark and not prey. "Stop," for a heartbeat it did. Then it started up again, impossibly calm. Heel, toe, heel, toe. I understood, with a shiver that went through bone, that it wanted me to follow the path. The tallies, the carved command, keep pace. The marbles rolled to the end of the safe boardwalk. Instruction, training, a passing on. I scrambled back to the hatch mouth, sweat cold enough to be a second skin. The square cut in the attic had become a shape of hope. I swung my legs down, groped with my toes for the ladder, found air. The ladder was not there. The kitchen table felt like it had moved a half foot, enough to turn a step into a drop. In the weak light from the hallway bulb, I saw nothing but the rectangle of my own apartment door across the hall. The footsteps approached the hatch, measured, patient, heel, toe, heel. "Please," I said to the dark, and hated the sound of my voice, and toe. I didn't wait for politeness from a thing that had never needed it. I jumped. The fall was short but not gentle. I hit the closet floor and my ankle shouted. The hatch above me remained a single smug inch open. A footstep landed up there, and dust kissed my face. I slammed the closet door and slid down it, heartbeat thundering. From above came the steady sound, the building's new metronome. I pictured the track of ovals in the dust, the gouged command beside the crack, the ghostly ledger of hours counted in footfalls. I limped to my apartment, locked the door, then pushed the wardrobe against it, a ridiculous gesture that pleased some medieval part of me. I sat on the floor, back to the wood, and listened. The footsteps continued until dawn. I did not sleep. When daylight finally spread like thin milk, I made a pot of coffee so strong it tasted like a dare and combed through online forums for anything to make me feel less insane. There were stories about top floors and roofs that breathed, about attics that sounded like bowling alleys. There were explanations, insulation expansion, crows with dropped walnuts, HVAC units throwing tantrums. All reasonable, none in my building. Around noon, the building manager knocked. "You make noise last night?" he asked through the door, as if he were policing a party. I laughed, the sound wrong in my own mouth. "There's someone in the attic," I said. He made a noise like a switch being flipped. "No," he said, "roof space." Then, as if this clarified things, "You top floor." I dragged the conversation into threat and legalities and keys and liability until he threw up his hands, muttered about insurance, and left. He never produced a key. He never acknowledged the scratch on the padlock. That night, I moved the mattress into the living room and lay beneath the tiny skylight, watching the orange dome of the city compete with stars. I wore my headphones but didn't play anything. I didn't want the footsteps to learn the beat of my music too. I tucked my hands under my shoulders like a child. At 2:17 a.m. they began, gentle as if trying to coax me. I understood the twist only on the seventh night, when a new sound entered the repertoire. Footsteps below me, soft at first, like a rehearsal, then clearer. Someone in the apartment underneath walked from their kitchen to their hallway to their bedroom. A quiet person. Careful. Their clock or their life kept the same hours as mine. The sound ran under the length of my floor, curious and familiar and shy. Overhead, the attic footsteps matched. Heel, toe, heel, toe. There was a system here, I realized, a balancing act. A person below, a person above, a person in between. Never alone, really, always contained in a stack of attention. If one stopped, the others adjusted. If the middle failed, gravity had a chance to assert its crude logic. Keep pace. Someone had scratched it as a mercy or a mandate. Maybe the building learned to crave it. Maybe the wood warped to the habit until it demanded obedience through threat. At 3:04 a.m., my ceiling creaked in a long sigh. Hairline cracks traced pale veins across the plaster. In a dream of courage, I imagined moving out the next day. But then where would the footsteps live? The thought landed hard and unreasonably tender. Without me, the building would find another. Maybe someone slower, maybe someone who didn't listen, maybe the person below. On the eighth night, rain again, louder, slashed by wind. The footsteps sped up without hurrying, an impossible trick. I sat up, heart thudding, and spoke aloud to the place I slept. "Okay," I said to the ceiling, to the attic, to the invisible, to the person below. "Okay," I stood. I mapped the safe path in my head, the track the ovals had written, across my rooms. I followed it. Kitchen threshold, left of the radiator, the long strip of floor parallel to the wall where the wood was darkest with the footprints of former tenants. I let my feet become echoes. Above, the steps matched mine. Below, the careful person walked too. In their life I did not know, perhaps holding a cup of tea, perhaps holding their breath. We were contained in one shape of attention, a three-layered heart. The cracks did not widen. The building stopped groaning, as if reassured. I became very good at walking. This is ridiculous, I thought each morning, but the thought wore down like a coin passed through too many hands. My ankle healed. I slept sometimes. I kept the hatch shut with a stack of paint cans I didn't own 3 weeks ago. The padlock remained, impassive and bright. I do not know how long a person can keep pace with a building. I don't know what happens if you miss a beat. I've learned the trick of making tea with one hand while walking, of brushing my teeth while moving, of reading by the window in a slow, contained circuit. I've learned the weight of my own footfalls, and how they change when I am hopeful or afraid or late for a thing. The person below has learned it too. I can tell when they've had a bad day. Their steps are heavy. I walk a little gentler then. Above, the footsteps always meet me, perfectly measured. If I stop, they do not. They never stop. Sometimes, in the few minutes before dawn, the building holds its breath and I hear a sound like a coin rolling and coming to rest. I imagine the marble at the end of the board, the instruction ball, and I smile in a way that doesn't reach my eyes. Yesterday, from somewhere far below, a door opened and shut with confidence. New voices in the stairwell, a suitcase's wheels ticking stair by stair. The footsteps in the apartment beneath me hesitated, then began again with a new quickness, just enough to say, "I'm still here, I'm still listening, I'm doing my part." I pressed my hand to the ceiling over the spot where the tallies are, where the words are carved. The plaster was cool. The dust tasted like a promise when it fell on my tongue. I did not go up to the attic. I did not need to see the tally marks to know I've added to them. It's after 2 in the morning now. The rain is soft. The city hums. Below me, the new tenant hasn't learned the building's mood yet. Their steps are scattered, anxious, then resolute, then anxious again. Above me, the footsteps are steady. So I walk. If you ever move up here, if you inherit this small sky window and the hum of the city and the reassuring lie of top floor, and if on a quiet night you hear footsteps above you where there should be none, listen. You are not alone. It is not trying to frighten you. It is trying to teach you the path. And if you hear footsteps below, slow down a shade, just enough to let the new heart find its rhythm. Keep pace. Keep the roof where it belongs. Keep us in our layers. If I'm still here and I am still here, you'll hear me. Heel toe, heel toe. Do not knock back. Do not ask questions. Walk. I moved to the town on a gray Tuesday. the kind of day that looks like a smudge on the calendar. I didn't know the streets yet, or which cafes put out chairs you couldn't trust, or which bus routes went nowhere. I was staying in a short-term rental with a plunge of cold light in the bathroom and a view of the municipal park like a postcard left in the rain. From my window, the park looked harmless. Spindly trees, onion-domed lampposts, a ribbon of path that curved and disappeared behind a stand of elms. On the first evening, the landlord told me the story because he said I'd hear it anyway. "People vanish," he said, plucking the lint from his sweater with neat little tugs, and always from the bench with the plaque. "Disappear how?" He shrugged. "You know how stories go. 1 minute they're there, the next, they're not. Don't sit on that bench." I wasn't the kind of person who went looking for trouble, but I did go looking for stories. I could hear my editor's voice in my head. Find the local color. Find the thing that lives in the corner of the room that people pretend not to see. The park would be my corner. By dusk the next evening I was there, a tourist to my own curiosity. The air smelled like damp leaf mold and cold iron. Wind threaded the branches and made a sound like someone carefully riffling a deck of cards. Somewhere a swing screeched a single metal note and then fell quiet, as if embarrassed. The path peeled off from the street and swallowed the noise of traffic. After a short curve, I saw it, the bench. It was not grand or sinister. Slatted wood darkened by weather, armrests that flared slightly, paint rubbed to gray where countless hands had touched. A plaque was pinned to its backrest, oval, bronze, greened at the edges. I expected it to say some variation of "in loving memory," but from where I stood I couldn't make out the words. The lamp above the bench hummed a little, the filament not so much flickering as hesitating, like a person reconsidering a decision. I cast a look around. The park was empty in the theatrical way that makes you wait for a cue. In the distance, a pond held a scrap of wind-wrinkled light, and a black dog barreled along the path across the water with no owner in sight. I heard the muted clack of its nails on the path, but then it broke into shadow and the sound ceased as if cut. I didn't sit. I put my backpack down on a neighboring bench, a safe one, I told myself, and took out my notebook, my small recorder, my phone, a thermos of oversteeped tea. Preparations had always calmed me, the ritual of setting things in neat lines. I clicked on the recorder and set it on the little iron table built into the bench arm. "November," I said softly. I had to remind myself of the month. Time felt oddly crowded here, as if other nights were jostling close. Newtown, municipal park, bench with bronze plaque, no one around, light buzz audible, occasional traffic sigh from Camber Street. My voice sounded like someone else's, a little breathless. I took a sip of tea. It was too hot and tasted like boiled pennies. I breathed the steam and it fogged the recorder's tiny red light. The wind quieted, the lamp's hum grew clearer. I wrote that down and immediately stopped, aware of how absurd it sounded. The lamppost's hum shifted slightly, like a throat clearing. When I stood and went to the plaque, a leaf scudded ahead of me and stalled at the bench leg, caught in the invisible eddy that fence posts make on windy days. Up close, I saw that the plaque didn't say "in memory of." The words were simpler. For those who need to rest. I waited, expecting a name beneath the line. The space under the inscription was blank. "That's not creepy at all," I said to the recorder, trying on a grin I didn't feel. My voice came back to me from the recorder's tiny speaker, delayed by half a second, an echo in miniature. The pause made it sound like the second speaker was thinking over my words. I didn't sit. I walked a circle around the bench, counting steps. Wet earth clung to the soles of my shoes, and I stepped on a twig that felt strangely soft, like wet rope. There were worn-away ovals of soil where feet had rested. Pockets of cold, the kind of cold that feels uneven, like standing in one of those supermarket chillers where invisible curtains of air are pulled tight, lay to right and left. I walked through one, stopped, and walked backward into it again. The difference in temperature was small but precise, as if it had been measured and set. The first strange noise was small, the kind of sound you rationalize automatically. A tap. Then another. I looked up and pretended it was a leftover acorn, though the oaks here had given up their acorns months ago. I made a note of it. I took a photograph. The bench's slats looked darker in the picture than with my eyes. I took another photo with flash. The wood grain swelled white, a tiger's stripes. Okay, I said to the recorder, and set it even closer to the plaque. The plaque text reads, "For those who need to rest." No dedication line. The bench looks older than the fixtures around it, or maintained differently. There's a faint smell of varnish. I paused and realized it wasn't varnish. It was tobacco, faint and stale, but somehow confusingly fresh, the way a remembered scent can be convincing. I glanced to my right and saw a man step out of shadow, a dark shape against the path. He walked toward me with an ordinary posture, hands in a coat, head tipped slightly down. Relief rose in me just enough to make fear possible. I called out, "Hey, sorry, can I ask you a quick?" But he raised a hand without looking up, a gesture that meant not now or no thanks, and continued past. When he reached the bench, he paused and turned his head as if listening to a whisper. Then he was gone. Not gone like out of sight. Gone like my eyes had flickered and the world had redrawn without him in it. The surface of the path where he had walked was undisturbed, no marks, no scuffs. I didn't chase him. I didn't call out again. My mouth had gone dry and my tea tasted like nothing. The lamp hummed louder, then sort of deepened, the way a refrigerator sometimes changes tone when it starts to cool in earnest. From somewhere near the pond came a chain's clatter and then a child's laugh, perfectly clear and perfectly wrong, as precise and free as a bell. I told myself this was why I'd come. I was supposed to be there for what happened next, wasn't I? I turned off my phone's notifications, leaving the recorder there to collect everything I didn't have the patience to write. The air had settled. The wind had gone elsewhere to worry someone else's trees. The bench looked very normal, even a little inviting. I didn't sit. I sat on the neighbor bench again. I told myself I was observing from a safe remove. The square of puddle by the path held the lamp's reflection with a slight vaginal tremor. A moth of improbable size flapped twice under the lamp and vanished. My eyes kept snagging on motion that turned out to be nothing, leaf skittering, my own breath fogging the cool air, the white blink of trash caught in grass. On the recorder, a new voice spoke. It was my voice, except for the way it was not. "Don't sit," it said quietly in my cadence. "Whatever you do." I froze in the act of lifting the thermos. The recorder's little screen showed the elapsed time, which hadn't jumped or skipped. It glowed politely at me, declaring it had merely been playing back what I'd said. But I hadn't said that. Not then. I looked at my notes, and the last thing written there was the thing about the smell. My watch ticked as if underwater. "Okay," I said aloud. I hear myself on playback warning me not to sit. I don't remember recording that. I possibly did and forgot. Unlikely. It could be a glitch, or it could be a prank, though there is no one here. Something flashed in the corner of my eye. The blank space on the plaque now held a pale scraping of letters like frost etching glass. I went closer. My name appeared there. Not carved exactly, but suggested, as if someone had pressed my name into cold bread dough and then smoothed the surface. The letters were wrong in some subtle way. An extra stem here, a missing crossbar there. When I blinked, they faded like seeing your shadow in a camera flash. I didn't touch the plaque. I had the sudden ridiculous conviction that if I touched it, it would be warm. Evening. The voice came from slightly behind me and to my left. I turned too quickly and had to reach out to steady myself on the back of the bench. The man was wearing a park ranger's uniform, but it was the wrong kind of uniform. Old-fashioned, maybe, or brand new in a way that hadn't settled. His boots were polished beyond the habits of any government employee I'd met. He smiled the way you are taught to smile at a stranger when you want them to like your town. I noticed two things quickly. He had no name tag, and there was a fine glossy sheen to his eyes, as if he'd been crying and the tears hadn't dried. "Hi," I said and found my breath again. "I'm just looking." A lot of people come to look. He tipped his chin at the bench. "You planning to sit?" The obvious answer was no. The answer I gave was the joke the situation required. I wouldn't want to offend local superstition. He nodded at that like it was an actual position he could agree with. "There's a way to do it safely," he said. "If a person needs to rest." He looked at my recorder, which was still ticking its numbers upward. "Town ordinance says the park closes at 10, but I don't like writing tickets. I like educating." "How is it," I asked and tried to make my voice casual, "that people disappear?" "They don't," he said promptly. They go on. His mouth closed over the last word tightly, like he was trying not to say it twice. I saw a man walk past me and then not be there. People pass through, he said. Like trains, doesn't mean the station is haunted. He came closer. His boots didn't scuff, they placed themselves. The smell I'd thought was tobacco got stronger. It wasn't tobacco, it was the clean, sweet, chemical smell of fresh varnish. I'll tell you something, he said, and smiled again. The bench isn't the problem. What is? He tilted his head back toward the stand of elms behind us. They cut one of the old ones down 5 years ago, he said. Roots go deeper than people think. They get into things, pipes, foundations. They remember what used to be. They work the soil after you forget. People like to rest under trees. Trees like to rest under people sometimes. The recorder clicked in an almost human way. On its tiny speaker, my voice, the voice I hadn't yet said, whispered, "He's not a ranger." And then the speaker hissed like a radio lost between stations. The man's eyes shifted to the sound, and for one moment they went entirely flat and wooden. Not eyes at all, but the suggestion of eyes, knots in planks where sap had once been. When he looked back at me, they were human again. A little too bright. "You all right?" he said. "Fine," I lied. "Sit if you need to," he said, the hum of the lamp threadbare above his words. "If you don't, stand. But decide, or the ground'll decide for you." Then he was beside me, not moving, not quite teleporting, but repositioned like a prop redressed between scenes. He pointed at the blank space on the plaque. Letters bloomed there again, not my name now, but a list of names, the degraded kind you see on old mailboxes. D. Chen, M. Perez Jan. Too neat and too wrong. One of the names uncurled itself and shifted, the way wet ink will crawl when the paper is thirsty. It stopped with the shape of my own. "The bench is hungry for something particular," he said, conversational, as if we were talking about squirrels. "It takes people who are already leaning, people who carry too much, people who sit while the exact thought in their heads is about someone else, people who want to rest more than they want to stay." "I don't want to rest," I said, meaning it. "I want to leave." "Then leave," he said. "But you've already leaned." He put his palm on the back of the bench, and wood did what wood shouldn't. It drank his touch and darkened. I backed away. I reached for the recorder and my fingers grazed the plaque. It was warm, not body warm, somewhere between sun and breath. My name brightened under the skin of bronze as if a dimmer had been turned up. I jerked my hand back and it left a faint print. The ground tilted, not much, enough that my body corrected without permission and my feet wanted to sidestep toward the bench. Leaves skittered to collect along the bench's legs in a tidy collar. Wind rose in a careful spiral, coiling around my ankles. Far off, a car horn sounded as though it were underwater. My thermos rolled from the neighbor bench and knocked softly into the leg of the one with the plaque, then settled against it like a dog exhausted from the chase. "Don't," my voice said from the recorder again, too late and right on time. The ranger, if that's what he was, put his hand out, not toward me, toward the air beside me. He was catching something I couldn't see, lifting it, displaying it. "Heavy," he said without looking at me. "You should put that down." "Put what down?" "What you carry," he said gently. "There are places to set it that won't keep it." "My keys?" I heard myself ask, stupidly. He smiled. "You're tired." It was such a small, wrong sentence that my scalp tingled. I dug into my backpack and pulled out a length of paracord, an old habit from fieldwork, something to lash tripods or things to yourself in places with high winds. I looped it through my belt and around the lamp post. The metal felt trustworthy and indifferent. I nodded fast and blind. The ranger's head cocked like a dog hearing something beyond the human range. "That won't keep you," he said. "It'll keep me long enough," I said, and meant it. A kind of anger rose then, not at him, not at the bench, but at the idea that rest might be a trap. The stories we tell about rest, about deserving it, about how you earn the right to sit down, those stories had always bothered me. You are not supposed to feel fury in the presence of a park bench. I felt it anyway. I lifted the thermos and poured the tea slowly over the bench's slats. The liquid steamed, the steam laced with the varnish smell until the cup of scents made something new, a breath, a hiss, a sound that wasn't a sound. The wood darkened, then paled, a livid bruise. The hum of the lamp faltered and came back stronger. The plaque vibrated under my hand. I grabbed its edge. It wasn't bolted. It had been pressed in, adhered with something that had no patience for the cold. I pulled. For a second it held with a ropey resistance, then came away with a soft sound like a tongue unsticking from the roof of a mouth. The bench made a noise deep in its joints, a mournful long creak that I felt in my jaw. The ranger's face changed. Not the way faces obviously change, but the way a composite image slides when the algorithm tries to reconcile mismatched mouths. For a second he was a dozen people, men, women, a child with a clipped braid, staring without blinking through his shape. Then he was only himself again, and his smile was gone. "Put it back," he said, and his voice had stacked echoes in it like a choir that hadn't practiced. "Take me, then," I said, reckless, "if that's what it wants." "I told you," he said. "It wants tired. You don't have any left. Look at you." He was right. Anger had burned the fatigue to its wick. I felt bizarrely alert, as if sharpened. The ground still tilted, the wind still pawed, the names on the plaque in my hand crawled and tried to settle into new arrangements. A small bright name near the bottom, Lena, kept sliding toward the place my name had been, as if eager to belong there. "Not her," I said. I didn't know who Lena was. It didn't matter. I hurled the plaque toward the pond with a crack of torque that felt like it came from someone else's shoulder. The metal disc flew, wobbled, caught the lamp glow, and struck the surface of the water with a slap. It sank without a ripple. The bench reacted. It would be neat to say the ground opened, that roots rose, that some cliché of tree horror wrote itself dutifully through the scene. None of that happened. The bench did the smallest thing. It shifted forward, not sliding but incrementing, the way furniture sometimes moves minutely when a house resettles. But that tiny forward tick yanked at me with real force, the way a starter tug on a lawnmower's cord pulls your arm, and the paracord snapped taut, burning my hip through the belt loops. Pain fired bright. My feet left the ground for the length of a breath. The corner of the bench's seat punched my thigh, and I felt the wood's warmth through my jeans like a living flank. "Stop!" I heard myself scream, to the bench or the man or to the traitor part of my own body that wanted, suddenly, violently, to sit. The paracord held. The bench made that long furnishing groan again and then went still. The lamppost hummed, and the tone changed to something like a question. The ranger watched me with a look I have only ever seen on people watching someone else fall and not catching them, torn between pity and calculation. "You think you won," he said softly. "I think I left," I said, panting. "Did you?" We looked past each other to the path, to where it became shadow, to where the park put its hand over the mouth of the world and made it say nothing. Somewhere across the pond, a duck uttered a single indignant syllable. I unknotted the paracord with hands that didn't feel like mine. I didn't turn my back on the bench. I walked backward until my heel found the path, then turned and walked fast, then ran, then kept walking again because running made too much of a sound, like being chased. No one stopped me at the gate. No ranger was posted by the notice board to ask the time or to smile too much. The street was itself again, cars looking ironically expensive, the cafe's chalkboard declaring soup in confident capitals. I went back to my rental and locked the door and tried to listen for quiet through the thunder that was my heartbeat. That night, I slept with every light on, and when the bulbs established their dominion over the room, shadows still happened in the corners. When I finally slept, I dreamed of wood grain that refused to settle, of a bench inching forward each time I blinked. I woke, say it was 3, say it was somewhere in the soft mouth of the night, and looked at the narrow slice of park framed by my window. The lamppost above the bench hummed all the way up here. I could hear it like a nail being rubbed against my nerve. In the morning I made coffee that tasted like leftover darkness. I reached for my keys to go find a new café, a new view, a city that didn't feel like an interior I had wandered into by mistake. My keys were warm from my pocket. I went to the door and the key didn't fit. I checked the other keys, the way you do even when you know they won't work. None of them fit the lock, which had not changed. The teeth of the keys had softened, somehow, very slightly rounded, as if each had been rubbed between finger and thumb for 100 years. I used to remember the little nicks on my house key, the bite I put in it opening a package once, the curl of metal from that time I dropped it on the train tracks. Those were gone, smoothed away. The keys had forgotten me. On my desk, the recorder sat where I'd left it, off now, politely neutral. I turned it on and pressed play, knowing I shouldn't. There was my voice, saying all the things I remembered saying. There was the heavy pause as someone else using my voice warned me not to sit. At the end of the track, something soft, a sigh, a hum, a bench clearing its throat. Then a new voice, quiet as handwriting. "Rest," it said. "You look tired." The window framed the park like a picture glued into the world. The bench was where it had been. The plaque was gone. I didn't go back that day, or the next. I started to notice benches more actively, as if they had been polite acquaintances who had waited until now to introduce themselves. In other parks, outside bus stops, inside malls, some had plaques, some had blank spaces where plaques could go. The hum threaded the city in a net only I could hear. Or maybe everyone could hear it, and they had learned, wisely, not to listen. Weeks later, in a different neighborhood, I found a bench that made my teeth ring when I stood near it. The plaque said, "For those who need to rest," in a font that pretended not to be a font. The blank space under the line was not as blank as blanks usually are. If I looked at it the way you look at optical illusions, I could see a pale suggestion of letters with my name's grammar. I didn't sit. I sat on the curb across from it and drank coffee that had cooled to the temperature of old pennies. I watched a woman with a stroller slow beside the bench and then keep going. I watched an old man in a hat lower himself halfway and then, with a little shudder of effort, stand again. I watched a boy break into a run and then stop abruptly and glance behind him as if summoned. He didn't sit either. When my phone finally buzzed, it was my editor asking about the story. Find the local color. The thing people pretend not to see. I wrote back, "It's a bench. It is everywhere." Then I deleted that and wrote something a person could publish about municipal design and public memory and how plaques work like small bells you can't hear but that keep ringing anyway. At night, when the lights are off, I can't rest. I am not tired anymore, not in the way I was. My body keeps me awake, as if sleep would be a kind of sitting I can't afford. Sometimes, in that soft mouth of the night, I hear the sigh and creak of wood settling from the next room. I get up because there should be no bench in my apartment. I get up because there isn't. Not yet. Only the chair at my small table, my coat on its back like an absent friend. I put my hand to the door because sometimes you test the lock even when you know it will still be wrong. The key finds the hole and hovers there, uncertain, as if the door will decide whether I belong. There are places in this city that know exactly where you lean. There are names that are not yet yours, waiting politely on blank spaces. There are benches, call them that, built from roots that remember and planks that want. If you sit, sit only for yourself. If you must rest, rest where the ground doesn't slope just enough to make your foot slide. When I pass the park now, I don't look, which is of course looking. The lamp hums like a withheld answer. The bench sits like a patient mouth. The blank place on the plaque is a question left unpunctuated. So far, the answer has been no. The house at the end of Folly Lane looked like it had been left mid-breath, as if someone paused in the act of living and never came back to finish. Paint peeled in long, curled tongues. The gate leaned. The windows stared with the dull sheen of cataracts. Neighbors called it condemned. Police called it closed. But people on the forums called it something else, something neat and sticky. The house where a man walked in and was never seen again. I told myself I was here for answers, not for adrenaline, not for clicks, and not for the way my chest felt lighter when I crossed caution tape. But when the lock surrendered to my tension wrench with a soft, tired click, something in me grinned. Inside, the air was damp chalk. My lantern found a narrow corridor hung with stained floral paper, its pattern ghosting into the lamplight and back. I stepped on tile gritty with plaster dust. To my right, a room opened, a parlor once. A sagging couch slept under a shroud of sheets. The mantel held a blackened rectangle where a mirror had hung. My breath condensed and then thinned as the lantern's warmth pushed the cold back an inch. "Hello?" I said, because that's what you do when you're alone. Sound fell flat. It didn't travel, didn't bounce. It was swallowed like a piece of bread. I chose the parlor as my base. I had a camping chair, a thermos, a notebook, a recorder, backup batteries. I had a clock that ticked a hair too loud. I arranged my things and sat. The lantern ringed the dust like a stage light while the rest of the house lurked beyond. A raccoon, I told myself. A pipe knocking, a building settling. And then I made myself drink the first mouthful of tea. It tasted metallic tonight, like the thermos had learned a new language. The house was quiet in the way a throat is quiet before a cough. So I listened. At first it was breath, barely there draughts slipping under doors, the paper whispering where it pulled from the wall. Then, from upstairs, the faintest impact, something like a foot's pad on old wood. The second sound didn't come right away. It lagged, as if the house had to remember how to make it. That, I said aloud into the recorder, is nothing. The lantern guttered, recovered. Its glass chimed. I jotted the time, 21:13, and drew a small box so I could check it later. The floor trembled very slightly under my feet. Not the kind of tremor you feel from outside traffic, but the ripple that runs through wood when a person moves in another room. A smell crept in, a smoke smell, stale and sweet, the kind you can taste on clothes weeks after the last cigarette. I don't smoke. Neither did the missing man, if the police report I memorized had that detail right. A strident plink came from the wall near the baseboard, a single bright note, as if someone flicked one tine of a music box and then held the rest. I turned the volume down on the recorder because suddenly it felt rude to record. This wing, I told myself, and then the kitchen, then the stairs. I always told myself where I was going in abandoned places, leaving a breadcrumb of intention behind, just in case. The kitchen had swollen drawers and a stubborn door. A trail of snail silver cut across the cracked linoleum. The refrigerator stood open, the racks furred with rust. When I shut it gently, the seal pulled with a sound like a sigh. Footsteps again, directly above me this time, 2 and then 3, as if whoever it was were remembering how to walk. I went back to the parlor for my notebook and found that the chair had shifted 2 inches. Not earth-shifting, not impossible, just misaligned in a way that jostled a small panic out of my ribs. My clock ticked calmly, 21:26. Below the box I'd drawn, a line of handwriting I didn't recognize appeared. 3-6. Don't let him talk. I stared hard. The tails on the numbers were mine, distinctly. The broad slash of the 7, mine. But I hadn't written it. I could feel the rhythm of what I had written, and this wasn't in it. Okay, I said to the house. Okay. There are houses that surge at you. This one just leaned, the way a person leans toward a whisper. Upstairs, the corridor narrowed, and the carpet under the dust was a threadbare runner that remembered footsteps. I pushed open the first door, a bedroom where wallpaper of blue roses blistered and peeled. There were 2 long parallel gouges in the floor where a bed frame had once been. A cold patch stood by the window, sharply local. My skin crawled only where my hand reached into it. The second door was a small office. A desk without drawers, a coil of extension cable. On a crate near the wall was something out of time, a cassette recorder with side A labeled in biro, MR Day 1. I knew the initials. Everyone on the thread did. Matthew R., 34, worked in IT, liked bad action movies and good noodles, walked into this house on a dare. The recorder was the only thing they found. That part was rumor. No official record of a recorder had ever been released, and I had scoured. The cassette clicked in my hands when I shook it. The tape had not broken. Don't, I told myself, and pressed play. Static bloomed. It folded down into a hum. Then a voice arrived, low, wary from pretending not to be afraid. It was my voice. Parlor as my base, it said. Camping chair, thermos, recorder, backup batteries, clock that ticks too loud. I stopped the tape. It kept spinning for a second after my thumb hit Saint Op, like it didn't want to obey. No, I said, because people say no to waves, to cars, to surgeons who have already started to cut. I rewound a fraction and pressed play again. The voice described the corridor, the peeling floral paper, the damp chalk air. It said 21:13 and described a plink near the baseboard. I shut it off and whispered my own name to steady myself. The whisper landed wetly on the wall and slid down to the baseboard like condensation. "Who are you?" I asked. Nothing answered. The house inhaled, exhaled, and the blue rose wallpaper murmured against plaster like cloth. I pocketed the tape because I didn't know if leaving it would be worse. As I did, something skittered inside the wall, many small somethings, an avalanche of legs. Rats, I thought, even though the movement sounded too smooth and too deliberate. I backed into the hallway and nearly tripped over myself because the runner had shifted to the right, exposing a seam of raw wood that looked freshly cut. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly open. A dull rectangle of something reflective hung behind it. I could see a slice of myself in it, just my shoulder, breathing too fast. The third footstep upstairs, the repeated lagging one, came again. This time I realized what it was. It wasn't a footstep. It was the echo of my own footfall, arriving late. "Stop," I said to my body without full humor. My foot obeyed. The echo did not. It took one more step in the reflection and turned, my shoulder turning a breath after. I put my palm on the wall. The plaster felt warm for a moment, then cool, as if the house pulsed. I opened the last door. In the room beyond, the mirror was not a mirror. It was a piece of glass set into the wall, backing painted black, surface tarnished with mercury-like blooms. In it, my lantern was a tired star. The room contained nothing else except a coat on a hook, a heavy winter coat, navy, the kind of coat that looks too big on anyone until you're caught in the weather. I pressed my fingers into the cuff. It was warm, as if a minute ago a wrist had been there. The smell of cigarettes was stronger now, threaded with something sweet and rank like old pears left to liquefy in a drawer. "Matthew?" I said before I could stop myself. The coat swung as if turning to look at me. At the edge of the glass, something leaned where my reflection should have been. It was almost me, but the features refused to line up. The mouth was a little too wide. The eyes were an unbroken black, not because they were empty, but because the room behind the glass was a room with no light. When it raised its hand, the coat sleeve lifted too. "Don't let him talk," I whispered. I didn't know where I had heard it first, my notebook, my own hand, and I didn't know who he was. The man? Me? The house? The thing in the glass mouthed something. The glass fogged on its side. I smelled fresh breath through old sugar. "Say it," it shaped at me, the syllables wrong on my lips in reverse. "Don't," I told it, and then the house did the simple thing that houses do when they're done with your doubt. It shut all the doors at once. Every door in the corridor slammed in a staggered cascade, as if someone invisible ran past with a shoulder meant to shove. My lantern flared tall, thin, blue, then normalized. The echo of the slams rolled down the stairs and back again. In the second of silence that followed, a child laughed in the vent. A single precise giggle, then restraint, as if someone had pinched the sound closed. I don't run in places that will break your ankles for running, but I moved fast and steady down the stairs. At the landing, halfway, a figure turned from the wall. It was not spectral. It had weight. Its coat brushed my sleeve. It was about my height. It wore the navy coat. A white scar tacked its lip into a permanent half-smile that was almost mine but not. "Don't," I said, because it looked like it was about to speak, and the cold moved toward my teeth as if it wanted to live there. It smiled wider and did not speak. It reached out and touched my wrist, and I felt every wrong thing at once, a pressure that remembered prying, a static that cut, a calm that didn't belong to me. Its mouth shaped words as a demonstration. I could read them even if I couldn't hear. "You left." "Matthew," I said again, and the figure flinched, not because it recognized the name, but because the name fell into it and found no bottom. It pushed me, not hard, enough to tumble me back a stair. Enough that the lantern swung and threw a quick, bright shadow across the wall, a shadow that moved when I didn't, that reached for my throat with open hands. I swatted at my own not hands and struck air. The figure chuckled without sound. It lifted a small device in its palm, my recorder. I looked down. My own hand was empty. I had not noticed it leave. The figure pressed the red button delicately, like a person starting a lullaby. "Say it," it mouthed again, and I understood suddenly that this wasn't about me speaking. It was about the house learning what it needed to keep. If I said my name into that red eye, the house would have it. It would keep it like a stone in the bower of a magpie. I pictured the voice of the man on the tape. I pictured my voice, later, describing the moment when I understood, the moment when I didn't let him talk. "Don't let him talk," I said, not into the recorder, but into the plaster. Then I moved. I hit the figure with the kind of force you can only find. It didn't fall so much as unhinge. The coat slumped. For a second, something webbed with dust and hair showed inside the collar, like insulation, like a nest. I reached for the recorder and got it, and the figure waited a half-second too long to react, as if it needed permission to. The delay gave me one step, then two. I took them. I reached the bottom of the stairs and slammed into the parlor. The lantern knocked against the mantel, and the mantel knocked back, and the mirror that wasn't there a moment ago suddenly was, a rectangle catching me with a small, pleased clink. In the glass, I watched the corridor behind me, watched myself doing what I did, 3 beats old. The figure at the top of the stairs turned. The delay caught up. It tilted its head, and in the glass it looked very much like a man, very much like me, very much like someone who had once believed that houses are just houses. The front door gave after 3 tries. My hand slipped on a knob that had worn many panicked oils. The outside air hit me with the blunt warmth of late summer. The street was quiet. Folly Lane had never looked more like a joke. I walked to my car with the recorder thudding in my pocket like a captured heart. I did not look up at the windows because I already knew the house would do the absurd human thing of pretending it hadn't been staring. In the car, I locked the doors. I held the recorder. The urge to press play was a chittering rat. I resisted it. I drove. Every shadow on the road lagged. Every billboard seemed promising in a way that had nothing to do with what it sold. At home, I set the recorder on the table like a bomb. I didn't play it that night. I slept with the lights on and woke with the heaviness of someone who had refused a bargain only to discover the bargain was already in progress. At 3:06 a.m., the clock on my nightstand stopped. In the narrow stillness that followed, I heard a door close softly in my hallway. I got up. The apartment smelled faintly of cigarettes and old pears. In the living room, where the recorder sat, a single extra object now rested beside it, a navy coat. It was my size. On the recorder, a new label had been written in a hand that was mine if you looked from far away. MR, Day 1. The initials didn't stand for Matthew R. anymore. There was a neat, dark curve where the first letter had been altered. It now read my name. There are clean ways to end a story. There are resolved endings with police reports and photographs and prisons. This isn't one of those. This ends with me sitting at my table, writing the last line of a note I don't recall starting. The line reads, "Don't let him talk." This ends with me staring at a coat I do not intend to put on and knowing that the intention will dissolve like sugar once the house needs me to be warm. This ends with me pressing play because I need to be sure. The tape hums. A voice arrives, low, weary from pretending. It says the house at the end of Folly Lane looked like it had been left mid-breath. On the recording, my voice is calm. In the room, my breath fogs the air and vanishes. At 3:06, somewhere far away but also inside the wall behind me, a door opens. A footstep lands and then, lagging faithful, mine follows. I don't turn around, not yet. I signed the sublet because the price made no sense. A furnished 1-bedroom in a narrow Victorian on Folly Lane, walking distance to the station, utilities included. The email exchange was brief. "I'm leaving town for a few months," the owner wrote. "Keys under the mat. Please water the plant." There was no tour, no meeting, just a key, a dead ficus, and a hallway so long it seemed to lean away from me. The building had the handsome rot of something once cherished. Crown moldings bitten by paint, a stair banister polished smooth by hands that no longer came and went. My unit was at the very end, after a stretch of wall where a door might have looked natural but didn't. The baseboard there was scuffed in a rectangle that matched the shape of an absent frame, like a healed scar. I tried not to let my imagination chew on that. I unpacked the essentials, laptop, toothbrush, a lopsided mug, and opened the windows. The air smelled faintly of wet stone and old lemons. The ceiling fan nudged curtains that had absorbed 100 previous summers. Outside, a tram cried metal on metal, and then everything exhaled and went quiet. It was an unfamiliar quiet. Not the peace of a library, more like the pause after something drops and before it breaks. I told myself it was the newness of the place. New floorboard creaks, new radiator ticks, a new fridge with a motor that sighed like a sleeping thing. By dusk, I'd stopped noticing the narrowness of the hall. By 10, I'd made tea. By 11, I was reading on the sofa, listening to the apartment settle around me the way a ship finds its balance in waves. My phone blinked midnight in white digits, and then the bulb in the hall flickered. just once, a tiny hiccup of light. A draft muscled under the door, cool enough to raise the hair on my arms. From far away, other floor far, I heard a door close. It was a soft sound, polite. Then nearer, a single knock. Not on my door, somewhere along the hall. I stood and instantly felt foolish. When you're alone, you make rules to keep from becoming a child again. Finish the chapter before you investigate. Bring the mug as a weapon if you must. The hall carpet looked darker than it had earlier. The pattern sunk into shadow. Under the ceiling bulb, dust floated and pivoted like it had nowhere else to be. I waited. I don't know what for. A second knock came, closer. 3 measured beats, the way my father used to knock at my bedroom door when he wanted me to know he wasn't angry. I stepped forward and felt the draft again, cool along my ankles. It came from the stretch of wall where the baseboard was scuffed, right where a door would have been, right where a door wasn't. My mouth dried out in that unhelpful way mouths do. I touched the wallpaper. It was warm from the building's belly, rough under my fingers with tiny bubbles of old paste. There was no seam, no give. I went to bed with the light on and blamed the draft on the stairwell and the knocking on neighbors I hadn't met. In the morning, the hall was ordinary. The bulb hummed. The scuffed baseboard was only that, a scuff. In daylight, there's nothing less frightening than last night. I bought groceries, introduced myself to the café downstairs, watered the ficus out of pity and habit. The barista, a man with forearms like braided rope, asked where I'd moved in. The end unit, 3rd floor, I said. He paused half a beat and smiled like he hadn't. Hey, I added, casual as I could make it, do you know if there was ever a closet or something at the end of that hall? He shook his head no while saying, old houses, funny spots. When I returned that evening, someone had left an envelope half under my door. Inside was a single key, brass worn to a dull shine, its tag stamped M Hall. There was no note. I tried the key in my unit's lock out of reflex. It didn't fit. Night slid in without me noticing. The windows became mirrors, my own face hovering over the street below. 11 o'clock. I made tea and didn't drink it. I sat on the sofa telling myself I would go to bed at 1:30. My phone winked to so, the colon blinking like a small, patient heartbeat. The hall bulb flickered, died, and then returned at half strength, as if it had aged a decade in a single second. I heard the knock. 3 beats. Then 3 more, closer. I stood because sitting felt like surrender. The draft was unmistakable now, cold enough to press through denim. The brass key in my pocket seemed to throb with my pulse. When I reached the scuffed baseboard, the wallpaper looked different, only by a breath, a shade. I leaned in and the pattern misaligned for a fraction of a second, and I felt that there was depth where there should not be depth. I put the key against the wall. The key turned, not in a lock, because there was no lock, in air. I felt the tug of it, like a magnet had taken hold. The corner of my vision swam, and the hall seemed to bend the way heat bends road. Knocking came again, not from my side. The pad of a fingertip on the other side of wood that wasn't there. I stepped back, and the sense of depth snapped flat. The key lay heavy in my open palm as if to say, not yet then. I left the hall light on and slept in fits, the key under my pillow like a fairy tale you aren't supposed to remember in the morning. Day 3, I decided this would either become absurd or it would become a story I told in the self-deprecating tone reserved for harmless nerves. I left the key on the mantel and went exploring the building. The stairs groaned and tried to warn me off. On the 2nd floor, the corridor turned a little too soon, leading to a small cupboard door under the eaves. Inside was a patchwork of shelves, and pushed behind a tin of screws and a ball of twine, a thin ledger. People used to write things down like archiving was a spell. Most of the entries were grocery lists and rent paid, but July of a year without a stick of dust read, "Do not stand in the hall at midnight. If the door speaks, it is not speaking." August, a different hand, tight and relieved. He's gone. The door's quiet. September, the original hand again, backward slant. It's back. It's back. It knocks like it knows the rhythm of my heart. I brought the ledger upstairs because of course I did. I told myself I was studying the house's history, not courting its attention. At 11:58, I put a line of salt along the baseboard because the ledger mentioned it once with pedantic insistence. At 11:59, I put my ear to the wallpaper because curiosity is a predator with polite shoes, cold like a window left cracked in winter, and behind the cold, an absence, not silence. The thinnest shape of sound, set so far away I had to imagine it. Footsteps on a floor that matched this floor but farther, softer. Someone breathing, measuring their breath to mine as if trying to not be heard. Midnight. The hall bulb pulsed and held. The draft became a wind argument. The salt trembled, then split into two neat lines as something pushed through without moving through. I watched the wallpaper ripple like paint over bone. And in that ripple, a door outlined itself in faint lines of condensation, as if the house were suddenly cold enough to exhale. The knob appeared last. Not metal, not anything that belonged on this earth. It was the shape of a knob instead, as though the idea of a knob had to suffice where substance could not. It turned. The sound was wrong. Not the rasp of metal, but the click of a tongue against teeth. "Help me," said my voice. I threw myself back so hard I bruised my shoulders on the wall opposite. The door that wasn't bowed inward, wallpaper wrinkling like cloth. A gap opened, slender as a smile, and from it came the smell of rainwater trapped inside a suitcase. A hand reached through, fingers pale with a yellow bruising under the nails, and then another hand, groping for the seam of our world. "Help me," the voice repeated, softer, hoarse, and mine. My words, my cadence dragged down by something heavy. "Who are you?" I asked, and the question was ridiculous because I knew. The hands paused. The breath on my face tilted warmer. "It gets easier," my voice said, my mouth making the sounds from a place that was not my mouth. "Every time you open, every night you wait. You're me. I'm you. Don't make me prove it." I ran. Not away, from the bedroom, to the kitchen. I needed proof of my sanity, which meant useless objects. I grabbed a roll of painter's tape and a pencil and a chair. I returned to the hall where the gap had widened to the width of 2 fingers. The tape trembled in my hands. I drew a line around the door. No, around the outline of where the door pretended to be, which felt like drawing on a fever. "What are you doing?" said my voice, impatient now. "Hurry." "I'll help," I lied, "but you must tell me what's on the other side." Hallways, rooms, they're all the same but wrong. A half laugh that I would recognize in a crowd as mine. Doors that won't open until midnight, windows that show you from the outside, clocks that never land on one but always skip from 12 to 12. It's hungry on this side, hungry and patient. I listened and wanted to retch. "How did you get there?" "You pushed me." No malice, a plain statement. When you were me, or I was you. I don't know how to tell it, so you'll believe the first time. You think you're original, that you've outsmarted the house with salt and tape. You're only earlier on the curve. The chair's legs scraped as I wedged it under the knob that wasn't. We create rituals to pretend we control the tide. "Don't," my voice warned, pleaded. "You think you can hold it shut. You think you can ignore it. Tomorrow you'll find the key heavier. The night after you'll hear a child crying on the other side instead of me. It learns the shape of what moves you. Please. The only way to break it." "How?" I asked, only because questions buy time. "Let me through and close the door behind me." Let me through and close the door behind me. I had read that exact bad advice in every fable that ever punished the curious. The gap widened enough to show me an eye, and the eye was mine but with the wrong light in it, like a photograph where a flash had matted the iris. It looked at me with an expression I knew from mirrors on mornings I treated coffee as penance. I stepped forward, and that was when the building intervened. A tram clanged outside. The kitchen pipe coughed. The ceiling in the stairwell gave a little settling thud. All of it knocked in a rhythm that did not match the door's rhythm. And for a moment, I remembered there was a world with gravity and taxes and neighbors, and I wasn't required to perform a ritual for a lie. I took the ledger from the floor and threw it into the gap. The hands caught it, surprised. I used the moment to slam what was left of a door toward its frame, wood on not wood, a collision like cold water. The knob that wasn't slipped, the chair bit into something that had never been bitten, and the whole hall leaned. "Don't do this," my voice shouted in a shape of rage that had never passed my throat. "You'll only be later. You'll make it worse." I pressed. The thing on the other side pressed back with my strength layered on mine. The wallpaper stretched to the point of tearing. I understood suddenly what the scuffed baseboard meant. The house remembered every time this had happened. The pressure took on a human cadence, the push and fail of two bodies opposed at a doorway while a party laughed in the next room. "Listen," I panted. "Tell me one thing only I would know. You pretend your mother's humming was about you when you were sick," it grated immediately. "It wasn't. It was about her own fear. You hate her for that, and you pretend you don't." I wavered. The chair shifted. The gap opened to a slice of a corridor that was my corridor, but wrong. The light came from the floorboards, and the ceiling was black as a closed eye. In that other hall, a figure watched from the far end, its head tilted. It had the outline of me and the angles of no one I had ever been. I screamed I didn't believe it, and that made it true enough to keep moving. With a last shove, I threw my weight against the chair, and the door that wasn't kissed the frame that wasn't with a soft, damp sound. Something caught between them. Skin, fabric, memory, and then slipped free. The outline flickered and was gone. I fell to my knees. The bulb steadied to full light. The salt lay in two straight lines again like white rails. The hall was a hall. The baseboard was a scuff. My breath sounded like I had run up several flights of stairs with a suitcase. I sat with my back to my real door until dawn. The key on the mantel rattled once and then went quiet. I tried the café when it opened. The barista watched me not order for so long that he poured me a coffee and didn't ask for money. "How long have you been here?" he finally asked. His voice had none of yesterday's cheer. It was careful. 3 days, I said, maybe 4. He nodded like he'd expected that. The last one said the same. Back upstairs, I put the key in the freezer. It felt like hiding a problem in a snowbank. I taped the outline of where the door would be if the door were a door with 3 layers of painter's tape. I considered leaving. But there are logistics to fleeing that resist panic. Leases, boxes, the way people look at you when you say, "I'm running from a door that isn't." Also, it was daylight. The mind repairs itself in daytime like a cracked plate drying glue. At 23:58, I packed a bag anyway and put it on the table. I laced my shoes. I texted no one because there was no one to text who would come and not make it worse. I called my own voicemail to say that I was okay, in case I wasn't later. The freezer motor kicked on with a growl. The key tapped against its plastic container like a heartbeat muffled by snow. Midnight. The bulb dimmed. The draft came. The tape trembled. I had this mad thought. What if the trick wasn't to deny the door or to open it, but to be already moving when it opened? What if the loop caught you only if you stood still and faced it like a confession? I grabbed my bag. I opened my apartment door and stepped into the hall and kept walking. Past the scuffed baseboard and its trembling dust, past the place where my voice practiced my apologies, past the idea of a knob. The building watched. The staircase waited with the manners of an old wolf. On the second step, a sound like a hand patting the wallpaper came from right behind my shoulder. Not a grab. A pat, as if to say, almost. I kept moving. The stairwell smelled of metal and light rain. On the first floor landing, a shadow slid up the wall that didn't belong to me. It moved a half-second after I did, my arms outstretched where mine were not, its fingers too long. It followed to the front door, where the latch stuck the way it always stuck. I yanked it twice, and then it went. Outside, night had teeth but no appetite for me. The tram wire hummed above the street. Somewhere, a song tried and failed to be a lullaby. I walked until the building was a shape among shapes, lights in windows like a code I didn't want to learn. I found a bus that didn't care where I was going. I got on. As the driver pulled away, I looked up at the opposite side of the street, 3rd floor, end of the hall, my window. The light was on. A figure stood there. It didn't move the way people move when they see themselves seeing. It moved as though it had been there a long time and had just now remembered to imitate a gesture. I rode until the city shook itself from its shoulders. At a plasticky cafe where morning is always happening, I waited for the sky to bleach. I thought about new leases, about storage units, about what the barista would say to the next person who asked about a closet that never was. My phone buzzed. A voicemail from my number. I turned my face to the cafe window and pressed play. "Hey," my voice said, "I'm okay, in case I'm not later." I laughed because the sound had nowhere else to go, and it made people turn to look. I wasn't crying. I wasn't. I don't know if I won. I don't know if winning is a thing that happens with houses that remember. All I know is I will not be there tonight at midnight in that hall that knows the rhythm of my heart. But that doesn't close the door. It only makes it appear somewhere else for someone with my bad habit of listening when the wallpaper breathes. When I finally went back, days or a life later, I did it at noon. The hall was a hall. The tape was gone, peeled cleanly away. The baseboard was scuffed in a brand new rectangle, the paint around it a fraction brighter. On my mantel, the freezer box had thawed without being opened. The brass key lay inside, dry, shining with a polish that wasn't mine. I carried it to the window and watched my reflection hold it up to the light. In the glass, the angle was wrong for me to see my eyes clearly. They might have been mine. They might have been patient. I put the key on the hall floor where the scuff was deepest. I walked away, closed my door, and slid the chain. The wind jostled the window. The building settled. Somewhere a tram clanged. I sat on the sofa and did not breathe for a long time. At 23:59, from the other side of the wall, someone knocked 3 times, and somewhere I used to be answered. I took the night shift at the Greverson Local History Archive because I assumed history would be the quiet kind of haunting. Boxes, papers, a lamp humming over a green felt desk, no customers, no co-workers, no one to judge the way I read out loud to keep myself from drifting off. The archive sat in the gutted shell of what used to be the town bank. The vault had become a climate-controlled storage room, and the main hall, brick, tall windows, echoing, had been chopped into reading nooks. It never felt like a library. It felt like the building was holding its breath. On my first night, the caretaker, an old man named Aaron, pushed a metal cart toward me, stacked with bound ledgers and a single parcel wrapped in oilcloth. "These," he said, tapping the ledgers, "are shipping manifests, 1873 through 91. Set the scanner to grayscale. The parcel is delicate. If you open it, log the accession number first." "What is it?" He gave me this look, dry as a page corner. "It's a diary. Don't read it out loud." I waited for him to smile. He didn't. He made me sign a sheet acknowledging restricted materials protocols, then shuffled out, lock clicking behind him. My footsteps sounded too loud after that. The vault computer pinged awake when I moved the mouse. A screensaver of sepia photographs dissolved into the desktop. I started with the ledgers, easy, rhythmic work. Turn a page, brush the dust, press the glass, scan. Ink bled and bloomed on screen like bruises. Somewhere above me, the building's single, coughing elevator stitched floors together with impatient dings. Far-off traffic hissed like something breathing. The parcel waited. I moved through 2 tomes before giving in. The oilcloth was stiff with old wax. The string made a tiny sound like a dry snake when I slid it off. Inside was a book the size of a hand. The cover wasn't leather exactly. It was softer and somehow warmer than it should be, embossed with an oval cartouche. Within the cartouche, a single word stamped in tarnished gold. Ledger. The accession tag, handwritten and spidery, said otherwise. Diary from effects of estate at 6 Folly Lane, donor anonymous. Initialed EB. Unknown dates. I logged it. I told myself I wouldn't read, not properly. Just a glance to verify condition. The first page smelled like iron and apples. Rows of tight, pale handwriting marched across the paper. It wasn't EB's hand that caught me. It was the first line. "If you are reading, you are writing." My laugh echoed too brightly in the empty hall. Someone had been clever. Fine. I flipped past that page. The next was blank. The paper a creamy tooth that made my fingertips tingle. Farther in, a pressed flower, a smear of amber resin, a sketch of a gate with too many bars to count. Then, 3/4 through, a spread of pages filled with script. The ink had an odd sheen, as if it never completely dried. "The keeper is alone tonight," it read. "The keeper likes to talk aloud because the walls are hollow and talk back." I shut the book so fast the air stirred the dust. Funny, I said to nothing, to the vault door, to the scan lamp humming. Someone knew Aaron, or people like him. I set the diary on the scanner and lowered the glass. The light strobed across the page. On the screen, the handwriting sharpened, the lines more legible in the cold eye of the CCD. It was like watching something wake up. I scanned another page and another. Every new page, even the blank ones, carried the taste of iron. 90 minutes later, I realized 2 things. First, that the building's sounds had changed. The elevator wasn't coughing, the distant traffic had gone strangely muffled. Second, that I had been hearing a very quiet, steady noise for some time. A whispering against paper, like a pen point moving. Only I wasn't writing anything. I lifted my head. The whisper stopped. I held still. My lamp hummed. Air ticked in the vents. The whisper started again, reluctant, like it had been caught and was pretending not to be there. Rats, I said, because rats were ordinary. I leaned down. The whisper was coming from the diary, the closed diary. I put my hand on the cover without thinking, the way you put a palm on a child's head to check for fever. Warm, too warm. I pulled my hand back. In the blank space at the inside corner of my palm, a faint gold flake clung to my skin, the exact tone of the title press. I'm overtired, I told the screen. The cursor blinked like a patient eye. I opened the diary to the first page again, the one with the snide little warning. If you are reading, you are writing. Below it, where I'd swear there had been only white paper before, new lines had appeared. Thin as breath at first, then crawling into words as my eyes adjusted. The keeper is not Aaron. The keeper is younger. The keeper came to be alone. My mouth felt dry. I glanced up toward the glass door, half expecting to see Aaron's shape in the dark. Nothing but my reflection, a smudge with a lamp for a head. Very funny, I said out loud, though no one had laughed. Who left the prank diary? The whispering resumed, just slow enough that it might have been my blood in my ears. Words coalesced as I watched. The keeper will try a test, because she cannot help herself. She, I said, unmoored. The building somehow got colder and closer at the same time. Everything inside me wanted to drop the book and walk out into the night, keep walking until the chill left my bones. Instead, because the line was right and I hated that it was right, I turned to a blank page and picked up my pencil. This is absurd, I said. If you are writing, then write this. The lamp flickers twice. I wrote the sentence down. The graphite made a sound like someone being quiet on purpose. I lifted the pencil. I waited. The lamp did not flicker. I exhaled, relieved and disappointed, ashamed of both emotions. See? Stupid. The breath of the building changed. The lamp flickered once, an insect shudder, then again. I had to brace my hands on the desk to keep them from shaking. The pencil rolled off and thumped the floor. Somewhere in the vault, far behind me, a paper slid against paper with lazy friction, as if a shelf had sighed. The hair rose on my forearms. I shouldn't have written another line. I did. The elevator dings. Silence, then. Ding. Stitched up through the floors. Ding. I swallowed. The diary's edges pressed a quilted pattern into my thumbs. An awful little thrill ran through me, the kind you get when the magician says pick a card and you glimpse it already in your hand. Okay, I said. It's a trick with the lights. Fault in the circuit. The elevator is on a timer, and I am suggestible. The diary did not dignify my rationalizing. It offered a thin new line instead, incising itself between the fibers of the page. Ask for something you do not want. I stared at those words for a long time. The lamp hummed. My reflection in the glass door looked too attentive. My grandmother used to warn me about half-serious prayers. Ask for patience and you'll be given a line to wait in. Ask for a sign and you'll get too many, most of them wrong. But I was not praying. I was playing with a book. Fine, I said, and the part of my voice that sounded like me was receding as if heard through plumbing. Right, footsteps upstairs, slow. There was no upstairs. The archive had a mezzanine full of newspapers in bound volumes, but the bank had been single-story since 1912. I heard them anyway, one step, then another, then a pause like someone remembering the feel of movement and trying it on again. Slow, patient. Coming toward the mezzanine rail. I stood so fast my chair skated back and kissed the wall. Aaron? I called, hating how my voice clipped on the last consonant. If you're messing with me, this is a hazard. There are boxes on the stairs. The footsteps stopped. From the mezzanine, a folded newspaper lifted its top corner and then settled. The light steamed across the rail. No shadow but mine. I did not want to write again. I didn't want the words to be the lever that moved the building. But the diary had already understood me. I had already understood the diary. It had a mouth and it needed something to chew. Who are you? I wrote, telling myself it was an act of containment. If I could define it, I could confine it. The answer scratched itself onto the page as if the nib were inside the paper, pushing out. You are. Cute, I whispered. vague. More lines spilled, neat as ledger marks. You read. Reading is the same as writing. You make the path by stepping. You step because you must know where it goes. I am where the path ends. For a moment my anger beat back the chill. That's not an answer. You opened the book with a question. The question was a door. I am what waits at doors. The elevator dinged again. I flinched. No one came through the glass. Still, the sensation of not being alone in that long room brightened until it felt like heat. Enough, I said, and closed the diary. It pulsed in my hands, not literally. It was in the way my skin read the thing. Hot coal warmth, as if the cover held the residue of a hand too long pressed there. I shoved it back into the oilcloth and wrapped it twice, then set a ledger on top, then another, old ink weight against whatever this was. My heart was punching at my ribs. I stood listening. No footsteps now. No whispering. Only the elevator, which refused to be ignored, dinging and dinging every 60 seconds like a metronome designed by someone who hated music. I made a decision. I would lock the diary in the vault and call Aaron. He could come get his prank. I could go home and promise myself I'd never take another night shift. When I lifted the ledgers from the parcel, the oilcloth had darkened in spots. My breath stuttered. The dark wasn't moisture exactly. It was the suggestion of words moving under the wax, like blood trying to spell. I put my hands on the cloth. Stop, I said, to an object, to a room, to the part of me that had made a door by asking. The cloth was warm. I peeled it back. The diary had opened itself to a page 3 from the end, where a slim ribbon had appeared like a vein. The writing was not the even hand I had been scanning. It lurched, as if written while standing, or while the ground under the writer moved. The keeper tried to shut the door. The door had already learned her name. My name wasn't printed there. It didn't need to be. I heard it as clearly as if someone were standing directly behind me, saying it in my ear with a familiarity they had not earned. I turned so violently the lamp quivered. The glass door reflected my shape, and for the length of a heart stutter, another shape behind it. Tall, shoulders too narrow and long, fingers like strips of ribbon, trailing letters as if shedding them. The afterimage was worse than the thing itself. It remained when I blinked. I don't remember picking up the box cutter. I do remember opening the diary to the last page and dragging the blade through it with the sick pleasure of doing the wrong necessary thing. The paper did not tear. The blade slipped through as if through water, left no mark, and came away wet with a thin brownish sheen that hadn't been there before. The metallic smell filled my head. The afterimage in the glass sharpened. Burn it, I thought, and the diary didn't need me to write that. The diary had been waiting for that thought since I breathed on its first page. There was a metal wastebasket under the desk. Old invoices. A matchbook with the archive's logo. I struck a match. The flame was a little blue fist. I fed it paper. I fed it doubt. I fed it the diary. The flames tasted the cover and recoiled. They ran sideways across the oilcloth, greedy for and terrified of the book at once. Smoke crawled up in a slow, complicated shape like handwriting. The ceiling detector clicked, then gave up on its duty. Nothing in this building ever worked until it worked too much. The diary opened itself, fast enough that the wind of it slapped my face. The last page had changed. A single line waited at the bottom. Write the ending. The shape in the glass stepped closer. Letters freckled its surface like spores. Where a mouth would have been, words gathered and fell apart, trying on my name again and again, each time getting closer to how I say it in my own head. I put the tip of the box cutter in my sleeve out of a reflex I didn't examine. I took the pencil. My hand shook. The smoke scribbled around me, and the building leaned, and all the small, careful noises it usually made were gone, as if it too were reading. Write the ending. I don't know your rules, I said to the diary, to the glass, to whatever patio of night waited just beyond the door. You eat possibilities, you travel on sentences, you turn readers into authors and authors into doors. The diary did not deny it. Fine. Let it have what it wanted. Let it choke on it. I wrote, the keeper closes the book. The thing can only go where words are. The ending is the last word. The ending is mine. The pencil tore a groove at the period. As soon as I lifted the point, the diary snapped shut so hard the desk skittered. The smoke collapsed back into the pages as if inhaled. The shape in the glass peeled backward like old paint and went flat. Only my reflection left, breathing hard, ash on my face. For a breath, it was over. Then a new line bled through the cover, slow as sap. It wasn't on the first page or the last. It was on the outside, stamped into the leather soft not leather, letters rising like slothar welts. Author wiped at it. Flakes of gold stuck to my fingertips. A cold settled around my shoulders, a bureaucratic cold, the temperature of official rooms and waiting lines. The building wasn't holding its breath now. It was signing paperwork. No, I said. No. The diary had gone quiet and heavy. When I moved it, the air pulled against it, reluctant to let it go. I wrapped it, tied the string, logged a note I couldn't bring myself to read back. I took it to the vault. The time lock made a thick sound, the sound of steel feeding. At the glass door, my reflection waited for me, ordinary again. I told myself I would go home, sleep, tell Aaron about a minor electrical scare. He'd shrug and say the building acted up at night. I'd laugh and blame coffee. I turned off the lamp. The dark came down like a curtain. Behind me, very far away and much too close, a pencil whispered. I stopped, in the vault. Not loud, not urgent, patient as a metronome, relentless as a thought. I didn't go back. I left the building and walked out into air that smelled like rain. The street was empty. Somewhere a train dragged its long spine through the night. At home I showered until the water ran cold. In the mirror, my face looked more like a photograph of my face than the thing itself. When I closed my eyes, I saw the last page, felt the period wearing the groove. I slept badly. I dreamed of doors that unfolded like paper. In the morning, I found gold dust on my pillow. I have tried not to think sentences. I have tried to speak in fragments, to half-finished thoughts, to deny the book a clean handle. But this is a story about regret, and it insists. I opened a diary I should have left wrapped, and it wrote itself over me. I wrote the ending, and the ending wrote back. Now I notice text where there wasn't any, on the underside of my wrist where veins make tributaries, on condensation beating the kettle, on the pail inside of my mouth when I stretch it in the mirror. Little letters testing for footholds. This morning, my phone lit up with a notification from a name I didn't recognize. Just one word in the preview, italicized by a whim I know too well. If I didn't open it, I won't. I am writing this down for you with a borrowed pen that I will leave here when I'm finished, on the desk by the green lamp, in the room where the vault keeps quiet during the day. You can walk in and see the oilcloth parcel and believe you own more willpower than I did. You can tell yourself you're just verifying a condition, logging a number, touching a cover to check its temperature. You'll find the first page, you'll read the line, you'll feel the tug of your own mind leaning forward, the way a body leans when a train arrives. You'll tell yourself you'll only read to the next full stop. You won't hear anything at first, then you will. The rest depends on a single small motion of your hand. Don't make it, or do. Someone has to write the ending again. I can hold it only as long as the period holds a groove, and grooves wear down. The building is holding its breath. I'm going back tonight to return this pen. I will keep my eyes on the floor and my mouth closed. I will not speak my own name. I will not look at the glass. If the diary is quiet, I will lock the door and go home and sleep. If it isn't, then the next line is already being written, and the author is already someone else. If you are reading, you are writing. If you are writing, don't. I only meant to stay a week. The listing made the cabin look like an apology written in wood and glass, stark, quiet, reflections of trees trembling along a lake so dark it might have been an open pupil. The host's message was short, keys under the rock. Please respect the water. It's an old lake. It doesn't like noise. The road lost its asphalt 2 bends before the water appeared. Dust lifted behind my car and fell back like tired birds. When the tree line opened, the lake lay in a bowl of hills bruised with evergreens, its surface unbroken except for a patient ring of ripples around the rotting end of a dock. The cabin sat close enough to touch the shoreline if it had hands. 1 room and a loft, a porch with a single chair, a tin roof freckled with the last hail of spring. I killed the engine. Silence leaned in so hard it felt like pressure on my eardrums. No motorboats. No highway hush. Only the metallic ticking of the car cooling and the faint, skeptical creak of the dock settling. The rock by the step lifted under my fingers with surprising warmth from the sun. The key was there. Inside, pine walls with their knots like sleeping eyes, a small table with a ring of water stained into it, a two-burner stove, a limp mosquito net above the bed. In the corner, a pot-bellied stove and a stack of split wood. The air had the canned chill of a place closed too long. It smelled like mouse nests, wet rope, and the dull coins of lake water. I opened windows. The screens hummed with tiny, trapped wings. The view framed by them was a painting of not much happening, reeds making an alphabet of whispers, a loon's head slicing a glossy V, and beneath it all the wrong kind of blue, too black, too heavy, like cloth soaked through. I put my bag on the bed. The floor was uneven under my feet. Every plank answered back. The first odd thing was the kettle. I'd rinsed it at the sink, the water coughing into the bowl with that hollow camp plumbing sound. When I set it on the stove and went to fetch tea from my bag, the kettle had moved 3 inches. A skid mark of water streaked the stove's rust. I frowned, hung up on the way the line bowed slightly, as if a drop had changed its mind halfway through falling. I told myself I'd bumped it. I told myself things like that all afternoon. As the light thinned, the lake breathed out a skin of mist. It moved like slow animals between the reeds and dragged its belly along the dock's boards. I dragged the porch chair to the edge and sat, cupping a mug to warm my hands, listening to the water touch the shore in that patient, soft-lipped way. From across the water, something tapped. 3 times. Measured, polite. I held my breath and heard it again, closer this time, like knuckles on a hollow door. The sound traveled through the boards, into the bones of my feet, and I stood before I could stop myself, tea slopping across my knuckles. "Hello?" I said absurdly to water. The loon answered with a laugh that had no humor in it at all, then slipped under. The tapping stopped. If there'd been a current, I might have blamed a rock knocking a log. But the surface lay patient and blank, and the sound had been deliberate. 3, then 3. I shook it off, telling myself the structure creaked, the pilings shifted. Old wood talks, old water answers. That's all it was. Inside, I made a nest, hoodie on the chair back, book face down like a tent, phone on airplane mode to protect the silence from intrusion. The cabin agreed to hold its breath with me. Moths nosed the lamp. The pages of my book drank the light. When my eyelids found their own weight, I turned everything off, lay on the bed, and watched the ceiling find itself in faint moonlight. Water has a way of changing the shape of darkness. You think you know how a shadow lands until it moves like a wave across your ceiling and you realize some part of the night is afloat. That's what I thought, at least, when the soft, low ripple on the ceiling flowed from one wall to the other, slow as a breath. Then came the knock. Not timid now, a dull, damp thud from under the house, directly below the bed. I held still as if my bones could mimic the room's planks. Another thud to the right, closer to the sink. I waited for a third. 3 always follow 2. It didn't come. I swallowed the idea of rats, or beavers in the pilings. Anything with teeth and a heartbeat I could understand. The air coming through the open window smelled like weeds and cold stone. My own breath sounded wrong in it. I lay there until my body forgot how to sleep, then got up and put the kettle on again. While it warmed, I looked out the window over the sink. The lake looked back. It's a cliché to say you see things in reflected water. You see yourself, you see what's behind you, you see the sky pretending to be a lake. But the surface in the square of that window held the cabin like a photo mounted under glass. The porch chair, empty. The dark slice of the roof. And in the open door, the door behind me, I saw someone standing. A tall shape without edges, the suggestion of shoulders, more absence than person, framed in my own doorway. The kettle shrieked. I spun. The door was empty. The room was empty. The only tall thing to stand in the doorway was the absence itself. Steam clawed at the ceiling. I turned the flame down with fingers that didn't seem to fit my hand. The window's reflection flattened into ordinary dark water. I didn't sleep so much as I rested with my eyes shut and let the night move around me. The morning smelled of wet pine and a sullen pot of silt. Pollen flecked the water like dust on velvet. The world here dated everything by the temperature of the light. Early, it said. Cold but willing to warm if you behave. I made toast, buttered it with a knife that left scratches like maps in the metal tray, and took my breakfast to the dock. A dragonfly considered my knee. When I shifted, the boards spoke in syllables. Out beyond the reeds, where the water went down like a swallowed secret, something pale turned under the surface and flashed away. Fish, I told myself. A big one. I should have driven into town for groceries, for company, for the ordinary ugliness of fluorescent lights and bored cashiers. Instead, I walked the shoreline, passing a rotting boathouse that leaned like a drunk in a stump with a rope looped to it in a knot that felt strangely practiced when I touched it. The beach, too generous a word for this narrow scab of sand and shredded leaves, was interrupted by a ring of stones barely showing through the shallows. I thought it was a fire pit until I noticed it formed a perfect circle, and at its center a darker hole, a true blue. The water there was almost black, even with the sun on it. By noon, heat crawled into the clearing and sat there like a person who had nowhere else to go. Back at the cabin, I found the chair on the porch had been dragged to face the water. I was almost certain I'd left it angled toward the door. Almost. On the table, a ring of wet like the ghost of a glass. I touched it. It felt cold, not damp. My fingertip came away smelling faintly of iron. The second night did not tiptoe. It came in and shut the door behind it. It started with the refrigerator, a small square thing that had been perfectly obedient until the light dropped. Its motor began to hum, rising in pitch until it sounded like a chorus of voices on the other side of a wall, one person catching up the note from another, round after round. I opened the door just to break the sound, just to prove there wasn't a mouth inside. The light snapped the humming off. Inside, the dull regret of a single apple, butter sweating on a plate, condensation on a can of beer. I closed it. Silence. Then the wet footprints. They appeared while I was brushing my teeth, bringing the mint sting into a mouth that had forgotten what fresh meant. One print, then another, darkening the plank floor. Not shoe prints. Bare, longer than mine, a narrow heel, long toes. They started by the door and came toward the sink, toward me, each print blinking gold with the reflection of the small light over the mirror. I froze, foam lacing my lips. The prints stopped at my feet. I did not look down. I looked at my face in the mirror and saw behind my left shoulder the skin of the lake tilted at the window, slick and black, as if the whole world had slid a few degrees. And the face in the mirror, mine, sheened as if I were looking through a layer of water. I spat hard, turned, and flung the door wide. No one. The porch boards held cool air like breath. Those same 3 measured taps came from the dock, once, twice, thrice. I grabbed the flashlight from the hook by the door. The beam flailed around the yard, stupid and white. A moth slapped my cheek. From the corner of the window, the dark circle of the stone ring on the beach drew my gaze like gravity. My light found it, and the beam died against the water's skin there, as if swallowed. It was the boathouse that finally asked the right question. On the way to the ring of stones, my light drifted over its bowed door and found a pattern of marks on the wood, straight, parallel scratches at shoulder height, 2 sets, one wider than the other, each paired and evenly spaced like fingers. No, like a hand reaching from inside, raking down, trying to pull the door in instead of push it out. The wood around the hasp had swelled with damp to a permanent frown. It was wired shut, wire so rusted it had moss on it. I cut it with the hatchet from inside the cabin. I told myself it was about raccoons, about safety, about a practical use for the tool. The wire came away with a noiseless sigh, as if the boathouse were relieving itself of a tight belt. Inside, the smell hit me like the sound of someone telling you don't look, and then you look anyway. Old rope. Rot. A cold, soft nothing. My beam found a ladder down into a square of water inside. A boathouse. This was where you'd haul a skiff, nose first, into the shadows to dry. Only there was no skiff, only water, that same heavy dark, too still for a lake, too sinking. Below the surface, something gleamed. My light skated over it. A ring? No. A metal hoop set into the foundation, and from it, a chain ran down. It disappeared into blackness like a thought you cannot afford to follow. The wood around the hole was scored with grooves that had not been made by any animal I wanted to imagine. I should have stepped back. I should have wired the door shut again and driven to town and lit the gas station parking lot like a church. Instead, something moved under the water. Not a fish. It moved too slowly and not like any animal, more like fabric turning, like a curtain drawing back. A pale oval lifted through the dark. a face. I stepped backward so fast the beam juddered. The face was not a skull, it was not bone. It wore the live clarity of a face under glass. A woman, hair coiling in the water like eelgrass, eyes open, mouth slightly parted. Her skin was the color of lake stone. Her eyes, save me, mouthed nothing. They watched me. She was not drowning. She was waiting. Waiting for me to meet her gaze properly. Waiting for me to forget glass and walls and scents and kneel on the ladder and lean in further until the surface turned to a mirror that had learned to open. When my beam shook, the light fell away from her. In the dark, I felt a pressure in my ears as if I were already underwater. And then in the speaker of that pressure, I heard it clear for the first time. Not a knock. A counting. A measured, damp, deliberate count from somewhere beneath the floor of the world. The taps echoed the beat of my own heart. I ran. The shore heaved under me like a boat. The stone ring drew the corner of my eye, and I made the mistake of looking into its center. The water there was deeper than the lake around it, wrongly deep, sensitive as a pupil. Light didn't go down there. It stepped aside. And in that black, another face rose up, softer-chinned, childlike, eyes open and shining with the kind of interested patience you only see in someone who has time. His mouth moved. I could not hear the words, but my own lips, without my permission, shaped them back. The wind shivered the reeds and translated for me. Trade. Behind me, the cabin door creaked in a way the weather could never produce, like someone politely letting themselves in. Inside, the refrigerator's choir rose again, the notes snagging on the rafters, becoming voices, not words, the shape of invitation. I turned my back on the ring and went into the cabin like an idiot who thinks a room is a smaller kind of world, maybe more manageable. The color of the lamp felt wrong, too warm, like a mouth held too close. On the table, the water ring had multiplied into 3, set in a triangle. The chair stood facing the door. The wet footprints had dried into salt outlines of feet that didn't belong to me. At the sink, the window held the lake's dark, but it also held the cabin behind me. I saw myself, shoulders hunched, lamp above my head like a captured sun. I saw a second me step into the frame beside me. My throat closed. The second me did not move when I did. It stared ahead at the water, eyes drowned black in the reflection's light. It raised a hand that I did not raise and pressed its palm to the other side of the glass, behind the glass of the lake's skin. The reflection fogged around its hand. On my side, the glass grew cold enough to ache. I could see my own breath. My reflection's mouth opened too wide and let nothing out. I don't remember picking up the lantern. I remember the heavy swing of it in my hand, the scrape of the match, the wobble of the flame when I took it out to the dock. I remember setting it at the edge so the light made a coin on the water. The lake breathed. 100 small movements gathered around the glow. I forced myself to lean over and look. Faces, not dozens, more. Men and women and children, and something that might have been a deer's head, and something that might have been only silt learning a new shape. All turned upward, all eyes wide, all mouths just open enough to take water in and give it back. Their hair floated like fields in wind. They did not ask. They waited. The surface between us was thin enough to break with a fingertip. The lantern hissed, and I understood the shape of the threat. It wasn't the faces. It wasn't even the thing wearing mine behind the glass. It was the lake itself, not content to hold what it had been given, hungry for symmetry. It reflected until it could replace. It collected until it could trade. It had learned my shape and wanted to wear it out of here on my feet. The 3 measured taps came up through the boards, through my ribs. The dock groaned. Water pushed up between the planks and kissed the soles of my shoes. Behind me, in the door's reflection on the water, my other self raised its hands as if to clap, slow and delighted. I grabbed the lantern and flung it at the reflection. The oil hit the surface and flared in a sound like breath returning. Fire skated across the skin of the water and made 1,000 coins of light. It made each upward-looking face a painting and then a ruin. The smell was disgusting, paraffin and algae and the char of something you should never cook. The dock complained. Heat strobed up under my chin and made my eyes run. In the window, the second me's face boiled away into a smear of dark, then cleared, and there I was again, my stupid pale face, my mouth open to draw in smoky air. In the circle of stones, the black pupil convulsed, tightened on itself, and then swallowed the flame whole. The fire tore along the surface in a swift ring, and then went out as if someone licked their fingers and pinched it. Silence. Smoke. Stars stepping boldly into the wind's cleared path. I backed off the dock, heel to heel, until the porch step butted the backs of my calves and I sat without meaning to. My hands shook hard enough to sing the bones. The night took the shape of itself again, cool, ordinary, a cricket getting its nerve up for a solo. The refrigerator clicked off. Moths rediscovered the lamp. The wet prints didn't return. The dock didn't tap. At dawn, the lake looked like it had never known fire. The ring of stones lay quiet as constellations you forget the names of. No ashes smudged the waterline. The boards smelled faintly of smoke, but only if you pressed your cheek to them. I lasted 2 more hours. I do not pretend it was courage. I packed in a way that would have made a soldier cry, left the keys under their warm rock, and drove until dust became asphalt, and asphalt became painted lines, and I didn't need the sky to tell me what time it was. You expect a story like this to end with a warning not to go, or a moral about respecting old places and older water. I don't have one. I have a sink that occasionally, above ordinary plumbing complaint, gurgles very softly and in threes. I have mirrors that fog from the inside on mornings that are too warm for that. I have a lake in my mouth sometimes when I wake, a taste like a penny pressed to my tongue. When I pour a glass of water, I look away as I drink. When I pass windows at night, I look quick, not long enough to let anything learn my edges. When I tap my fingers on a table, sometimes I hear an answer from beneath the wood, measured and polite and patient. It's an old world. It doesn't like noise, but it listens, and it remembers your face.